In this video, I'm going to introduce you to genetic algorithms and the genetic algorithm project that you're going to do. So in the hill climbing optimization, you had a list of numbers and you made a small change to one number. And if it gave a better result, then without that small change, you kept the small change. And then you kept repeating that pattern of small changes. And you tried to find the maximum value. So if you imagine all the values that you could possibly reach as the height on a graph, and you have a two-dimensional graph, there could be a fitness landscape, such as it's called, that looks like this. And you want to reach the highest point, right? So that's right up here. But what can be really hard for this type of optimization that you did in the previous project is when there is what's called a deceptive landscape. And it's when you sort of have a moat around your best value. Sort of like you have a castle and they would dig a trench and filled with water around it, right? You have that moat that's preventing you from reaching the highest value because you don't really get to see the whole landscape. You have to sort of explore by just checking individual points. So if this was the fitness landscape of the function you were trying to maximize, basically if you graphed the function and it was some kind of two-dimensional function in this particular example, this is not the function you're working with, it's just an example. It would be difficult to find this top peak here using hill climbing because you would frequently get stuck on some of these outlying hills. So one of the solutions to this is to use something called a genetic algorithm. And a genetic algorithm sort of is able to jump around the landscape a little bit more than a hill climber does because it uses this special thing called crossover, which we'll get to in a moment. So let's look at the basic form of a genetic algorithm. So sort of your flow chart for a genetic algorithm goes something like this. Initialization, that's where you create your population. Population is just a big old list of possible solutions. So in this case, it's going to be a list of lists of numbers, right? In our optimization challenge, the previous project, your individual was, again, a list of numbers that you evaluated what its value was when you plugged it into the function. You want to try and find the biggest one. So here we're doing that same thing. We're going to get a whole list of those individuals, though. And the first thing we might do is assess their fitness, right? And you're going to use a function that does this for you. I'm going to provide that. The same way I had that function to maximize in the optimization problem, right? That was our fitness function for the optimization project. And I'm going to give you a different fitness function for the genetic algorithm, one that's deceptive, right? One that has those valleys, those low areas around the best fitness, which makes it a little bit harder. And then there's going to be some kind of selection. Genetic algorithms are based after natural selection. We want to keep the most fit, the healthiest, the best individuals that look like they're going to solve our problem, whatever our problem is. Next, we're going to perform crossover. I'll talk about this again, like I said, in a minute. And we're going to perform mutation as well. And then we're going to have some kind of stopping criteria when we decide we're finished. Our stopping criteria for this particular problem is we're going to know if we've reached the best solution. And if we haven't, we go back up here and we keep trying. We repeat the fitness assessment, selection, crossover, mutation. And actually, the one thing I would add to this chart is reproduction. You're basically going to take all the members of your population and you're going to create some new members so that your population doesn't dwindle to zero as you keep selecting, as you keep killing off members. And then you're going to keep repeating this until you find the best solution. So just some terminology. So suppose A1 through A4 are members of your population, right? Remember, each member is just going to be a list of numbers. And for this project, we're actually just going to use ones and zeros. I know for the last project, we used just any decimal number. But for this one, it's just going to be ones and zeros. So there'll be longer lists than this, but this is just an example. So all of those lists comprise your population. An individual list of numbers is going to be a chromosome, right? We're using this biology analogy. And then a single number in the list is going to be a gene. So mutation is really easy to understand, especially if you just have ones and zeros. A mutation means you're going to flip the value of a particular gene. You're going to go into the list, find an index randomly, and if it's a 1, you're going to change it to a 0, and if it's 0, you're going to change it to a 1. You could have more than one mutation occur at a time. That's up to you. Frequently in these algorithms, as we get closer and closer to the solution, we might decrease the frequency of mutations. So we'll have fewer and fewer that happen simultaneously. So finally, crossover. And crossover is really what makes genetic algorithms different from hill climbing optimization. Because the hill climbing, if you think about that mutation, it's very similar to what we were doing with the hill climber, right? We were changing a particular value to see if something was better or worse. That's pretty much what we were doing with mutation here. But crossover is where things get different. So suppose we have two different individuals in the population, one list that's green here and one list that's blue. And what we can do is we can create basically children of these, right? Again, we're sticking with that biology metaphor, the same way that parents that are humans or animals or any organism will cross over their genes to create a child that's sort of a mixture of their genes. That's what we're doing right here, right? So example, we could pick, so they picked right in the middle here, and they swapped the list values for the two children that they created. It doesn't have to be right in the middle. It could be at various different places. And you should choose randomly where the swap is going to occur to produce these new individuals. Now, frequently in genetic algorithms where we're trying to find a best solution, we will keep the best solution that we had in the previous generation. So unlike biological evolution, we'll keep whoever was best before. We won't just sort of kill off the older generation just because they're older. And there's different types of crossover. So this is called one-point crossover. I'll scroll down. There's also multi-point crossover, where you can choose maybe 2 or 3 different places and swap back and forth in those different places. Right here we see that these three values moved down and the blue values moved up. And now we created these two children. Or there's even another thing called uniform crossover, where you just randomly choose at each gene whether that gene is going to swap or not. And you should choose which one of these you want to do, or even make it more interesting and compare which of these is better for the problem that you're going to work on. So transitioning to what is the problem you're going to work on. All right, so I'll show you the code in just a second, but the first thing I want to show you is this right here. So, and this is a smaller example than you're going to deal with, right? This is just 9 digits, 9 ones and zeros. You're going to deal with lists that are 27 ones and zeros long. And the way it works is that you get more fitness for triplets, right? When you have 3 ones or 3 zeros in a row, you are sort of a better organism. It's a very contrived problem. We'll get to more applied stuff later on, I promise. But first, we're going to exercise on just this simple problem. So the worst is when we have no triplets at all. And there are other genomes that are equally the worst as this one. But you'll see there's no triplets at all right here. So this is the worst. This one's pretty bad. There's only one triplet right there of 3 zeros, and nowhere else are there any triplets. This one's okay. All right, we have 2 triplets, one right there and one right there. This is pretty good. So it's also better to be a triplet of 1s than it is to be zeros. So this is pretty great, right? Lots of triplets. This is even a little bit better because it's got that triplet of 1s. And this is the very best. So here's what makes this problem hard. If you look down here, and I'll share all this text with you. I just want to talk it through a little bit. What makes this problem hard is that this genome, this individual in the population right here, chromosome, I'm using the terminology the website gave us, this chromosome has better fitness than this chromosome, even though this one is closer to the best solution. I say closer, I mean I only have to change 1, 2, 3 of these zeros to 1s to get the best solution. But for this one, I have to change 6 of the zeros. Right? There are more changes that I need to make to this one to get the best than there are to this one. This is what makes this problem deceptive, right? If we just changed one gene at a time, we would get here and be like, oh, this is the best. Any change that you make to this is going to make it worse. If you change this to a 1, you lose the triplet of zeros. It makes it worse. If you change this to a 0, you lose the triplets of 1s, and it makes it a lot worse. Whereas this one, like if we actually changed this once to a 1, this would be a better individual, a better chromosome than what we had before. But we can't know that without testing it, right? So that's the challenge. All right, so here's the code that I'm going to give you. This is the fitness function. You're going to pass in a genome, which is just a list of 1s and zeros, and I want it to be 27 1s and zeros long. And it's going to make its calculation, and it'll return a single number, and it's the fitness that it's decided that this individual in the population has. and you want to keep going until you find the best fitness individual. Now I have some testing that I ran right here, and this is literally the exact same individuals in the population as I showed you up in the text up here as these right here. So you can run it and sort of test out and see that you can see what exactly their fitness is. It prints out when you run it. The last thing I want to say is that besides working code that actually evolves these using the genetic algorithm, you must include a separate mutation function, right? It has to be defined as a particular function. Same with crossover. Same with a function to create and return an individual genome, right? Basically create an individual for the population. And then lastly, a function that will call this third function a whole bunch that will create a whole population. This is just a typical thing that you'll do for organization, and I'm making it mandatory for this project. So I hope that tells you how to get started for the genetic algorithm project. As always, ask me if you have questions.